You think this is funny? The voice on the phone was quiet. Not angry, not screaming, just quiet. The kind of quiet that made Blake Hunter's stomach drop through the floor of his $1 million penthouse. That bike rode to 11 funerals. It carried a man's daughter to her wedding. And you burned it so strangers online could laugh for 30 seconds. Blake said nothing. We're not calling the police. We're not calling your lawyers. We're coming to talk, face to face, like men. The line went dead. And for the first time in 5 years of making viral content, Blake Hunter was genuinely afraid. If this story already gave you chills, you haven't seen anything yet. Subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to the beginning because this story doesn't start with a phone call. It starts with a fire. The desert outside Nevada doesn't forgive mistakes. Old-timers who grew up in the Southwest will tell you that. The heat, the silence, the vastness of it, they have a way of stripping people down to what they really are. The sand doesn't care how many followers you have. The Joshua trees don't watch your live stream. The dark Nevada sky doesn't know your name. But Blake Hunter didn't believe in things like that. At 25 years old, Blake Hunter believed in one thing above everything else: attention. Not love, not legacy, not meaning. Attention. The kind measured in real-time viewer counts, in comment velocity, in the dopamine rush of watching a number climb past 1 million while you stood in front of a camera grinning like you'd just conquered the world. And on that particular Friday night in late October, with 500,000 people watching live across 3 different platforms, Blake Hunter was convinced he was about to conquer it again. Yo, chat, are you ready for this? Blake shouted into the camera, spinning around to face the crowd behind him. The crowd, 47 of his closest paid associates, professional hangers-on, and sponsored guests erupted. Someone set off a flare gun into the black sky. The drones hummed overhead, their camera eyes blinking red. Music pounded so hard the sand vibrated under people's shoes. And at the center of it all, illuminated by $3,000 worth of LED party lights and surrounded by dry desert brush that had no business being that close to an open flame, sat an old motorcycle, a Harley Davidson. Rusted, dented, the chrome dulled to a chalky gray. The leather seat cracked and curled at the edges like an old book spine. The kind of bike that looked like it had been dragged up from the bottom of a dry riverbed and left in the sun for a decade. Blake's logistics coordinator, Noah Mercer, had sourced it from a storage unit auction outside Barstow, California 3 weeks earlier. Storage unit number 44, which had gone unclaimed for over 6 years before the facility finally put it up for sale. Noah had paid $280 for the entire contents of the unit. The Harley was just part of the haul. Blake had taken one look at it and said, "Perfect. This thing looks like it belongs in a trash fire." And now that's exactly where it was headed. "All right, chat, here we go," Blake shouted, strutting toward the bike with a can of lighter fluid in one hand and his wireless mic in the other. "We've burned a Porsche. We've blown up a yacht. We've dropped a grand piano from a helicopter. Tonight we send this piece of junk straight to motorcycle heaven." The live chat exploded. Fire emojis flooded the screen in a waterfall of orange and red. "Blake, do it. Go off, king. This is insane. I love this channel." "Let's go," Blake grinned at the camera. That grin, practiced 10,000 times in mirrors and phone screens, was his trademark. Wide, white tooth, slightly dangerous. The grin of a man who had never once in his adult life experienced a consequence he couldn't buy his way out of. "For the people who say we've gone too far," Blake announced, spinning the lighter fluid can in his hand like a baton, "you clearly haven't seen what we have planned for November." Laughter from the crowd. His girlfriend, Savannah Reed, stood 20 feet back with her own camera crew filming in slow motion for her separate beauty and lifestyle channel. She was stunning, and she knew it. Long blonde hair pulled up in a messy knot, oversized leather jacket, rings on every finger catching the firelight. Her comment section would later fill up with "Queen energy" and "She's literally a goddess" while she posted slow motion clips of the flames. But right now, she was watching Blake with that look she sometimes got. Not quite discomfort, not quite doubt, something closer to mild curiosity, the way a cat watches a fish tank, briefly interested before losing focus. "Babe, do it already. My arm is getting tired," she called out. More laughter. Blake pointed at her. "The queen has spoken. He turned back to the motorcycle, raised the lighter fluid, started coating the seat, the handlebars, the gas tank. That's when Noah spoke up. "Hey, Blake." Noah's voice was quiet, careful. Blake didn't stop. "What's up, bro?" "I found some stuff in the saddlebag earlier." Noah was holding something, a small, worn envelope, the kind that had been folded and unfolded so many times the paper had gone soft as fabric. "I think maybe we should, I don't know, take a look before we—" "Noah." Blake looked at him with patient condescension, the same look a teacher gives a slow student. "We're live. 500,000 people. Focus." "Yeah, but there were patches in the bag, like old club patches and some medals, military stuff and photos." "Storage auction, bro, by probably some old dude's garage junk. Don't overthink it." Noah looked down at the envelope, looked up at Blake, looked back at the motorcycle. He started. "Noah." Blake's voice had an edge now. "Are you good? Because if you need to step back and take a breath, I can have someone—" "No." Noah shoved the envelope into his jacket pocket. "No, I'm good." He stepped back. Blake turned back to the camera. "All right, chat. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. He dropped the lighter. The fireball was bigger than anyone expected. The explosion of heat pushed the crowd back 6 feet. Someone screamed. Someone else laughed. The drone cameras captured the entire thing from 4 different angles. The orange mushroom of flame, the dark smoke curling up into the desert sky, Blake throwing his arms wide open and turning to the camera with his face lit gold by the fire. "That's what I'm talking about. Chat, let's go." The live viewer count spiked to 612,000 in under 90 seconds. The comments were a river of fire emojis. The sponsors were already messaging. Savannah's slow-motion footage of the flames looked, she would later tell people, genuinely cinematic. And the Harley burned, chrome melting, leather curling black, the handlebars glowing red. But underneath the paint, blistering and peeling in the heat, something appeared that nobody in the crowd noticed. Not Blake, not Savannah, not the drone operators or the camera crew, or the 47 paid guests who were busy recording the moment for their own channels. Only Noah saw it. He was standing further back than everyone else, and the angle of the firelight hit the gas tank at exactly the right moment, right before the paint fully burned away. A symbol. 2 words in a Gothic font, and a logo that anyone who grew up in the American Southwest would recognize instantly. Noah's face went white. He took the envelope out of his jacket pocket with shaking hands, opened it, pulled out a photograph. Old faded, the color gone slightly yellow at the edges. A man's on a motorcycle, wearing a cut, a patch on the back, the same patch, the same symbol. Noah looked at the burning bike, then at the photograph, then at the fire. "Oh no," he whispered. To no one, to himself, to the desert. Nobody heard him. The music was too loud. The crowd was too happy. Blake was doing backflips for the camera. And the Harley of Roy, Ghost Callahan, legendary former president of one of the most feared chapters of the Hells Angels Motorcycle Club in the American Southwest, finished burning in the Nevada sand while 500,000 strangers watched and laughed and hit the like button. By the next morning, the video had 11 million views. Blake woke up to his phone melting with notifications. His management team had already fielded 17 sponsorship inquiries. His merch store had crashed from traffic overnight. His publicist sent him a 3-paragraph text that was essentially one long scream of joy. He made himself a protein shake, stood on the balcony of his rented Nevada penthouse, and looked out over the desert with the satisfied expression of a man who had once again proven himself right about the world. Life was simple when you knew the rules. Give people fire. Give people spectacle. Give them something to watch, and in return, they give you everything. He didn't check the biker forums. He didn't look at the Harley enthusiast message boards, where by 7 that morning, someone had already posted a frame-by-frame breakdown of the drone footage showing the gas tank symbol in the moments before the paint burned away. The post had 900 replies by 9 a.m. By noon, it had been shared 14,000 times across 6 different forums, 2 subreddits, and 44 Facebook groups. He didn't see the single photograph uploaded anonymously to 3 different platforms simultaneously of a man standing beside that exact Harley in front of the Grand Canyon, taken sometime in the mid-1990s. The man's name was typed in plain white text beneath the photo. Roy Ghost Callahan. He didn't see the replies under that photograph, hundreds of them. From men with names like Hatchet and Diesel and Silverback and Duke. Short replies, one line each, some of them just a single word. Seen? Received. We know. On it. And he absolutely didn't see the post from a Tucson account with an American flag and a motorcycle in its profile picture, an account with no followers, no content created 3 days ago that said nothing except a map pin of Blake's production company's registered business address in Las Vegas. 23 replies, all single words. Received. 3 days after the fire, Noah Mercer got a phone call from a number he didn't recognize. He almost didn't answer. He'd been getting a lot of strange calls since the video blew up. Trolls mostly, a few fans who somehow found his number. Once a journalist, but something made him pick up. Hello, silence. Then you bought the unit. Not a question. Noah's throat tightened. Who is this storage unit 44 outside Barstow? You bought it at auction. How did you know? The auction records are public. You had a company name on file. It wasn't hard. The voice was calm, measured, not young, somewhere in the range of a man in his 60s maybe, with the kind of voice that had spent decades not needing to raise itself to be taken seriously. We're not calling to threaten you. Noah sat down on the nearest available surface, which happened to be his kitchen floor. Okay, he said carefully. We want to know one thing, the items in the saddlebag, the envelope, the photographs, the medals. Where are they? Noah reached into the drawer where he'd put the envelope the night of the fire. He'd gone back and retrieved it from his jacket pocket before tossing the jacket in the wash. He wasn't sure why. Some instinct, some feeling he couldn't name. I have them, he said. They didn't burn. I took them before the mocked. Good. The voice didn't soften, but something in it shifted, marginally, like a glacier moving 1 millimeter. Those belonged to a man named Roy Callahan. He passed away 14 months ago. His family had been trying to locate his storage unit for over a year. The facility lost the paperwork. Noah closed his eyes. I'm sorry, Tom, he said. A pause. The motorcycle was his whole life on 2 wheels, the voice said. He rode it to his mother's funeral in 1987. He rode it the night his daughter was born, went out alone on the highway for 3 hours because he didn't know what to do with how happy he felt. He rode it to 11 funerals of brothers who died before him. He rode it to VA hospitals every Christmas for 20 years, visiting veterans who had nobody else coming. Noah was gripping the envelope so hard, his knuckles had gone white. There's a boy in Phoenix right now, the voice continued. 12 years old. Roy was his grandfather. That boy spent the last year asking his mother where Grandpa's motorcycle was, because Roy used to promise him, when you're old enough, I'll teach you to ride it. Noah's eyes were burning. The family didn't want money, the voice said. They didn't want revenge. They just wanted the motorcycle back so that boy could sit on it someday and know something real about his grandfather. The silence that followed was the loudest thing Noah had ever heard. I need you to arrange a meeting, the voice said finally, between me and the young man who burned it. Blake's not going to, Noah started. I'm not asking Blake. I'm asking you, because you're the one who took those photos out of the saddlebag. You're the one who saw what was there. You're the one who tried to say something before they lit the match. Noah stared at the envelope in his hands. How do you know that? We have the drone footage too, all of it, including the angles the production team didn't post. Another silence. What's your name? Noah asked quietly. Wade, the voice said. Wade Mercer. Noah blinked. That's my last name. I know, Wade said, and for the first time, the voice had something in it that wasn't just measured calm. Something older, something like the recognition of 2 people who've been standing on opposite sides of the same river for years without knowing it. I know. It took Noah 4 days to get Blake to even take a phone call about it. Blake's publicist intercepted everything first. That was her job. Run the buffer, assess the threat level, decide what her client needed to know. She'd handled controversy before. A lot of it. She'd handled the time Blake drove a forklift through a McDonald's for content, the time he fake proposed to a fan on a live stream, and the fan's actual fiancé showed up, the time a contracted pyrotechnician threatened to sue after the yacht explosion. She knew how to manage. Bikers making noise on the internet, she told Blake over the phone on day 2. It'll cycle out in 48 hours. Don't engage. Don't apologize. Don't acknowledge. Standard protocol. Cool, Blake said. On day 3, a man in a leather cut walked slowly past Blake's rented penthouse building 3 times. He wasn't looking up. He wasn't being aggressive. He was just walking. But the building's doorman, who had lived in Nevada his entire life, and recognized a patch when he saw one called the building manager. The building manager called Blake's security team. Blake's security team added 2 people to the lobby rotation. Blake's publicist upgraded the situation from ignore to monitor. On day 4, Savannah came into Blake's home office holding her phone out with a look on her face that Blake had never seen before. It wasn't fear, exactly. Savannah didn't do fear in public. It was something closer to the expression people get when they realize the weather has changed and they're not dressed for it. Someone left this on my car, she said. On her phone was a photograph of her white Mercedes in the parking structure of the salon she went to every Thursday. A parking structure with a security gate and a CCTV system and a code-only elevator. On the hood of her car, placed with perfect precision in the center, was a small metal bolt, charred black, still smelling faintly of smoke. That's from the bike, Blake said. He said it immediately without thinking, and then hated that he'd said it because saying it out loud made it real. I know that's from the bike, Blake. Savannah's voice was very even. How did they get into a secured parking structure? Blake looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he called his publicist. Upgrade it, he said. She was quiet for a moment. To what level, she asked. I don't know, Blake said. The level where it's not funny anymore. Another silence. I'll make some calls, she said. That same afternoon, Tyler Royce, Blake's childhood best friend, second in command of the content crew, and the man who had personally kicked the starter pedal twice before the lighter fluid caught, posted a TikTok. To all the old bikers crying in their garages right now, Tyler said into the camera, grinning the same grin he had spent 5 years perfecting as Blake's on-screen foil. It was a rusty piece of junk from a storage auction. Ned. Calm down, Grandpa. We paid less for that bike than you probably spend on gas in a month. He then held up a can of motor oil and poured it on his head. His followers lost their minds. 4 million views in 6 hours. Blake watched it from his couch and felt the first real stirring of something he hadn't felt in years. Something that took him a while to identify because it had been so long since it had visited him. Dread. Pure, cold, quiet dread. Because Tyler had just stood up on the internet and waved his arms at exactly the wrong people. And those people were not cycling out in 48 hours. They were not keyboard warriors. They were not internet boomers. They were men who had spent 40 years learning that patience was more powerful than anger. Men who had buried their brothers and stood at gravesides in the desert wind without flinching. Men who drove through the night without a destination because the road itself was the point. Men for whom a motorcycle was not content. It was a covenant. And somewhere in Arizona, in a quiet garage that smelled of oil, in old leather and decades of roads traveled, an old man named Wade Mercer put down his phone, looked across the workbench at Walter Callahan Roy's younger brother, a man whose hands were scarred from 30 years of hard miles, and said the 6 words that would change everything. It's time to go to Vegas. Walter didn't answer right away. He picked up a small brass key from the workbench, an ignition key worn smooth from years of use. Roy's key, the one Walter had found in the envelope Noah sent him, the photographs, the medals, and that one small key on a leather cord, the key Roy had carried for 37 years and never once left behind. Walter closed his fingers around it. Tell the boy we're coming, he said. The desert wind moved through the gap under the garage door, and outside the stars over Arizona had never looked so cold. Noah Mercer didn't sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with Roy Callahan's envelope in front of him, the one he'd saved from the saddlebag, the one he'd almost handed to Blake before the lighter hit the ground, and he went through everything inside it for the 4th time in a week. The photographs, the military medals, the small leather-bound notepad with handwriting so cramped and precise it looked like it had been etched rather than written, and the key, that small brass ignition key on its worn leather cord. He'd sent the physical items to Wade Mercer 2 days ago, shipped overnight, no return address, because he didn't know what else to do. But before he boxed them up, he'd photographed every single one. Every photograph, every page of that notepad, every citation on the back of those medals. He didn't know why. Same instinct that made him pocket the envelope before the fire. The same quiet voice in the back of his chest that kept saying, this matters, this matters, this matters, pay attention. Now he sat, looking at a photograph of a man he'd never met. Roy Callahan. Ghost. Standing beside his Harley somewhere in Monument Valley, the red formations behind him going orange in late afternoon light. He had to be in his late 40s in this photograph. Broad shoulders, a face that had been lived in hard but not unkindly deep lines around the eyes, the kind that come from squinting into decades of highway wind rather than from unhappiness. He was looking at the camera with an expression that wasn't quite a smile, but was something better, something quieter. The look of a man who knew exactly where he was and was completely fine with it. Noah set the photograph down. He picked up his phone. He had 47 unread messages. 22 of them were from Blake's group chat, mostly Tyler sending memes, Evan and Derek reacting with laugh emojis, Savannah's occasional terse one-word responses. The energy of people who are collectively deciding not to think about something. The other 25 messages were from numbers he didn't recognize. He'd stopped opening those 2 days ago. He turned the phone face down on the table. Then it buzzed, insistent, twice. He flipped it over. The text was from Wade's number, the only unknown contact he'd saved. It said, we're in Nevada, coffee tomorrow morning. There's a diner on Route 93, sunrise. Just you. Noah stared at the message for a long time. He typed back, I'll be there. He put the phone down, looked at Roy's photograph one more time. Then he said quietly to no one in particular, I'm sorry I didn't stop it. The kitchen was very still, and somewhere out in the Nevada dark, a convoy of motorcycles moved steady and unhurried down a desert highway, headlights cutting through the black. The diner on Route 93 was the kind of place that had been there since before the highway was properly paved. Vinyl booths, a counter with spinning stools, a coffee machine that sounded like it was clearing its throat every time it brewed. When Noah arrived at 6:15 in the morning, Wade Mercer was already in the back booth, hands around a mug watching the door. Wade was 67 years old and looked like exactly what he was, a man who had spent 4 decades doing hard things in difficult weather and had made peace with all of it. Gray hair cut close jaw like quarried stone eyes, the particular shade of calm blue that takes a lifetime of discipline to develop. He was wearing a plain flannel shirt. No cut, no patches. As if he'd made a deliberate decision to arrive as just a man. He didn't stand when Noah sat down. He just looked at him. You're younger than I expected, Wade said. Everyone says that, Noah replied. You nervous? Extremely. Wade almost smiled. Not quite. Good. Means your instincts are working. People who aren't nervous in situations like this are either stupid or dangerous. You're neither. He pushed a second coffee mug across the table, already poured. Sit down properly, you're hovering. Noah sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The waitress came, they both ordered eggs, and then she left, and the diner settled back into its quiet hum of distant highway noise and coffee machine grumbling. Tell me about the auction, Wade said. So Noah told him. All of it. The storage facility in Barstow, the unclaimed unit, the $280, the Harley under a tarp in the back corner, the boxes of miscellaneous items he'd barely gone through before Blake pointed at the bike and said perfect. He told Wade about finding the envelope in the saddlebag when he was loading the motorcycle into the trailer. He told him about the patches, about opening the envelope and seeing the photographs and knowing somewhere below conscious thought that this was not junk, that this had weight. I tried to say something, Noah said. His voice dropped. Right before I walked up to him and I tried to say, Blake, wait, there's stuff in the bag, we should look at this first. And Noah stopped, pressed his thumb against the handle of the coffee mug. He looked at me like I was an inconvenience, and I backed down. Wade said nothing. I backed down, Noah said again, like he needed to hear himself say it twice to fully own it. 500,000 people were watching, and Blake looked at me like I was slowing down the show, and I backed down. And then you saved the envelope anyway, Wade said. Yeah. Why? Noah thought about it honestly. Because I couldn't fix what was about to happen, but I could at least not let those photographs burn. It felt like he searched for the right word, the least wrong thing I could do. Wade looked at him for a long moment, measuring something. Roy would have liked you, he said finally. He had a thing about people who knew the difference between what they could and couldn't control. He said most people spend their whole lives fighting the wrong battles because they can't tell the difference. Noah felt something tighten in his throat. How long did you know him? 34 years, Wade said simply. We rode together through 6 states, 4 presidential administrations, and more funerals than I care to count. He wrapped both hands around his mug. He was the best man I ever knew. Not because he was perfect. Lord knows he wasn't. But because he always showed up. That was Roy. You could be at the lowest point of your life, 3 in the morning, middle of nowhere, and if Roy knew you needed him, he was there. On that bike, no questions. The eggs came, neither of them touched them for a moment. His daughter called me the night after she saw the video. Wade continued, his voice dropping to something quieter, but no less steady. She didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just said, Wade, what do we do? And I said, we do what Roy would have done. We go face to face, we look the man in the eye, and we let him sit with what he did. Wade looked up from his mug. That's all we want. Not money, not an apology on camera, not a viral redemption video. We want Blake Hunter to sit in a room with Walter Callahan and understand, really understand, what he burned. Noah nodded slowly. And you think that's possible? I think, Wade said carefully, that there's a human being inside that young man who has been buried under performance and money and cameras for so long that he's forgotten what it feels like to be real. And I think sitting across from Walter, hearing it from Roy's own blood, might be the thing that digs him out. He paused. Or it might not, but we're going to try. Noah stared at the table. He's not going to agree to a meeting, he said. Wade said. His lawyers, his publicist, his security team, they're all telling him to go silent and wait it out. He will, Wade said again. The same tone, unshakable. How can you be that sure? Wade finally picked up his fork. Because we're not going to threaten him. We're not going to pressure him. We're going to keep doing exactly what we've been doing, and eventually he's going to realize that the silence is worse than any confrontation. He took a bite of his eggs, chewed, looked at Noah with those calm blue eyes. Fear of the unknown is always louder than the thing itself. We're not his enemy. We're his conscience. And a man can only outrun his conscience for so long. Noah thought about that. And if he never agrees, Wade set his fork down. Then Walter lives with it, he said quietly. And Blake Hunter lives with it. And that boy in Phoenix Roy's grandson, he lives with it. And the world just keeps turning. Something crossed Wade's face then. Not anger, something more like grief that had been folded into acceptance over many years. But I don't think that's how this ends. They finished breakfast mostly in silence, the comfortable kind that comes when 2 people have said what needed saying and don't feel the need to fill space with noise. When Noah stood to leave, Wade said without looking up from his coffee, "One more thing." Noah paused. "Tyler Royce's TikTok, the motor oil one." Noah closed his eyes briefly. "Yeah. Tell the kid to take it down. He won't listen to me." "Then tell him this." Wade finally looked up. "There's a veteran in Albuquerque named Cruz who rode with Roy for 15 years. Cruz has a daughter who runs one of the top 5 most watched Twitch channels in the country. She has 11 million subscribers, and she hasn't said a single word online about any of this." Wade's voice was absolutely even. "And she's waiting to see how Tyler responds before she decides whether to say something or not." The implications settled over Noah like a slow, cold wave. "I'll call him," Noah said. Tyler didn't take it down. Of course he didn't. Tyler Royce had spent 5 years doing everything Blake Hunter did, only 1 level lower and 2 levels louder. And the one thing he had never learned to do was back down from anything online, because backing down was losing and losing was dying, and in their world there was no third option. So the TikTok stayed up. And the Twitch streamer in Albuquerque, Cruz's daughter, who went by the handle Skyline Red and had 11 million people who showed up every time she went live, posted a single still image to her community tab at 11:30 that night. It was a photograph of Roy Callahan, standing beside his Harley. No caption, no hashtag, no call to action, just the photograph. And a small subtitle beneath it in plain white text, "Some things deserve to be remembered." By 9 the next morning, the post had 4 million impressions. Journalists started calling Blake's publicist. Not gossip blogs, not internet drama channels. Actual journalists, a culture writer from a major newspaper, a producer from a long-form documentary company, a podcast with 4 million listeners that covered stories about technology and human behavior. Blake's publicist called Blake at 7:30 a.m. in a register Noah had never heard from her before. Clipped fast, precise, the voice of someone who is recalculating very quickly. "This is no longer a biker forum situation," she said. "Okay," Blake said slowly. Skyline Red posted Roy Callahan's photograph to 11 million people last night without saying a single word. "Do you understand the strategy there? She didn't attack you. She didn't call you out. She didn't give you anything to respond to or fight back against. She just put the man's face in front of 11 million people and let them draw their own conclusions." Silence. "That's a very sophisticated move," Blake said, and there was something different in his voice, something that hadn't been there last week. "They're not going to stop," his publicist said, "and they're not going to escalate. That's the whole point. This is a campaign of moral weigh-it, and they know exactly what they're doing. Every time Tyler posts something dismissive, every time you go silent, every time this drags on another week, the story gets more sympathetic toward them and less toward you." Blake sat with that for a moment. "So what do you want me to do?" She hesitated, just briefly. "They want a meeting, face-to-face, no cameras." "No." "Blake, no cameras means no control. No cameras means whatever happens in that room, I have no record of, no ability to." "Blake," her voice cut through cleanly, "this is not a content situation anymore. This is a real situation. And in real situations, you don't get to bring cameras." Silence stretched out over the phone. "Let me think about it," Blake said. He hung up. He sat there for a long time. His phone was on the table in front of him, and he didn't pick it up. He just sat. And in the specific quality of that silence, not the chosen silence of someone who's decided to ignore something, but the involuntary silence of someone who's run out of responses, something was shifting inside Blake Hunter. Slowly, reluctantly, the way a bone sets after a break, painful, structural, permanent. His phone buzzed, not a call, a text, unknown number. He opened it. There was a photograph. Roy Callahan on his Harley, the one taken outside the Grand Canyon, the late afternoon light turning everything gold. Below it, a single line of text. That bike carried this man to his daughter's wedding. She's 34 now. She still hasn't told her son what happened to his grandfather's motorcycle. Blake stared at the photograph. His thumb hovered over the screen. He didn't respond. He put the phone face down, but he didn't delete the message. That was the thing nobody would have predicted about Blake Hunter. In that moment, he didn't delete it. He left it there, like leaving a light on in a room you're not ready to go back into yet, but aren't willing to shut the door on either. Across the city, Derek and Evan, the two quietest members of Blake's crew, the ones who'd mostly stood in the background at the party, laughing along, filming on their phones, were having a very different kind of morning. Derek had been up since 4 a.m. reading biker forums. Not because anyone told him to, because he couldn't stop. He'd found the original thread where someone identified the bike from the drone footage, and he'd read every single reply, all 900 of them. Old men writing in the plain, direct language of people who don't bother with performance, talking about Roy Callahan like he was someone they'd all personally known. Stories about the charity rides, about the VA hospital visits, about the time Roy drove 6 hours in a thunderstorm to sit with a brother who'd just gotten a terminal diagnosis because the man had called at midnight and Roy had just gotten on the bike without thinking twice about it. Derek closed his laptop at 6 a.m., went into his bathroom, looked at himself in the mirror for a while, and then called his mother. He hadn't called her in 3 weeks. He didn't tell her why he was calling. He just said he missed her, and she said she missed him too. And they talked for 40 minutes about nothing important. Her garden, his cousin's new job, whether she should repaint the kitchen, and when he hung up, Derek Voss sat on the edge of his bed and felt the specific weight of a man who has just realized he has been living his life very wrong for a very long time. He didn't post anything online that day. He didn't appear in any of Tyler's content. He just went quiet. Evan did the same thing, though he wouldn't find out that Derek had too until weeks later. Tyler, however, posted 3 more times, and Savannah was doing a sponsored skincare tutorial. But that same afternoon, while Tyler was filming and Savannah was applying serum in front of a ring light, and Derek and Evan were sitting separately with their own quiet realizations, Noah Mercer answered a call from Wade. "He's close," Noah said without preamble. "His publicist is pushing him toward it. He's scared, but he's running out of reasons to say no." "I know," Wade said. "She said no cameras. He's resistant to that. He'll come around." "Wade," Noah paused. "Walter, is he okay? I mean, is he ready for this? If Blake comes to the meeting and he's not, if Walter can't hold it together, or if things go..." "Walter has been holding things together since 1971, Wade said quietly. "He held it together at Roy's funeral when the pastor said something wrong and 40 bikers were ready to stand up. He held it together when his own son was in a hospital bed for 11 days. Walter Callahan has had more practice holding it together than most people have had practice doing anything." A beat. "He's ready. The question is whether Blake is." Noah absorbed that. "What do I do now?" he asked. "You wait," Wade said, "and you keep the envelope safe. The photographs, the notepad, don't let those out of your sight. Walter is going to need them at the meeting." "Why?" "Because Blake Hunter needs to hold them in his own hands," Wade said. "He needs to feel the weight of them. A man can look at a photograph on a screen and feel nothing. But when you put something real, something worn and handled and carried by another human being through decades of actual life, when you put that in someone's hands, it's different." He paused. "Roy used to say a real thing always tells the truth. A screen can lie. Paper that's been folded and refolded 100 times, that can't lie." Noah looked at the envelope on his kitchen table, the one he'd saved from the saddlebag, the one that had been through the smoke-scented pocket of his jacket and through his own guilty sleepless nights, and was now sitting between an empty coffee cup and a phone that wouldn't stop buzzing. "I'll keep it safe," he said. He meant it like a promise. 4 days later, Blake Hunter called his publicist back and said 4 words: "Set up the meeting." She didn't say "I told you so." She was too professional for that. She just said, "I'll make the call." And she did. And the call went to Wade Mercer. And Wade Mercer, sitting in a garage in Arizona with Walter Callahan across the workbench from him and the Nevada desert somewhere to the north, simply said, "Good, we'll be there Thursday." He hung up. Walter looked at him from across the workbench. In Walter's right hand was Roy's ignition key, the brass worn smooth from years of fingers gripping it in parking lots, in desert highways, in the parking structures of hospitals and wedding venues and funeral homes across the Southwest. Walter set the key on the workbench between them. "Will he understand?" Walter asked. Wade thought about Blake Hunter, about the grin he'd seen in the video, the practiced ease of a young man who had never once held something irreplaceable in his hands and understood what it was. "I don't know," Wade said honestly, "but he's going to have to sit across from you and look you in the eye. And I've never seen a man look Roy's brother in the eye and feel nothing." Walter was quiet for a long time. Then he picked up the key again. "Roy rode that bike to my wedding," he said. "Drove 400 miles in the middle of a heat wave. Showed up with road dust on his face and flowers he'd bought at a gas station. Stood up in the church in his cut because he didn't own a suit. And my wife, she loved him for it. She said later it was the most real thing at the whole ceremony." Wade said nothing. "He wasn't just my brother," Walter said. "He was the best version of what our family could be." His scarred hand tightened around the key. "That kid burned it for 30 seconds of people laughing on the internet. I know. I'm not going to yell at him," Walter said, and the steadiness in his voice was somehow more devastating than any anger would have been. "I'm not going to threaten him. I'm just going to tell him the truth about Roy, and then I'm going to let him live with it." Wade nodded, and outside in the Arizona night, the stars were cold and bright and countless, the way they only get in places far from city lights, in places where the land remembers everything that has ever happened on it and holds the memory without judgment. Thursday was coming, and Blake Hunter was out of places to hide. Thursday arrived the way reckonings always do, not with noise but with a quiet that had weight to it. Blake woke up at 8:47 a.m. without an alarm. He lay in the dark of his penthouse bedroom, staring at the ceiling, and did something he almost never did anymore, he thought without performing. No internal monologue rehearsed for an imaginary audience. No mental framing of how the day would look on camera. Just raw, unfiltered thought in the dark, the kind that comes when a person is stripped of every distraction and left alone with the actual contents of their own chest. He was afraid. He didn't want to name it that, but that's what it was. Not the manageable anxiety he sometimes felt before a big stunt, the kind that sharpened into focus the moment cameras started rolling. This was different. This was the fear of walking into a room where he didn't control the narrative, where his grin wouldn't work, where the number of followers he had was completely irrelevant. He got up, made coffee, stood at the window watching Las Vegas go pale in the early light. His phone was on the counter and he didn't touch it for 22 minutes, which was by his own calculation, the longest he'd gone without checking it in approximately 4 years. His security lead, Marcus, a former Army Ranger, who had worked for Blake for 2 years and who had seen a lot of things he found professionally concerning, called at 6:15. "You still want the detail for today?" Marcus asked. "No," Blake said. A pause. "Blake, these are Hell's Angels. I'm not saying they're going to—" "I said no, Marcus." Blake's voice was flat and final in a way Marcus hadn't heard before. "Wade Mercer called my publicist and told her explicitly, no lawyers, no security, no cameras. I show up with any of that, they walk, and this never gets resolved. So no." Another pause, longer this time. "You want me to at least fit outside?" Blake almost said yes. The old Blake, the one who had burned the motorcycle and grinned at the camera, would have said yes without hesitation because having someone outside was still having a card to play. But something in him this morning was different. Something had shifted in the night since his publicist had called, since the messages had come, since he'd lain awake reading the things those men had written about Roy Callahan on forums he'd never known existed. "No," he said. "I go alone, that's the deal." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then, "Okay, you call me the second you're out." "Yeah," he hung up. Noah picked Blake up at 9 a.m. in a plain rental car, no branding, no camera mounts, nothing that identified either of them. Blake got in the passenger seat without a word. He was wearing dark jeans and a plain gray jacket, nothing he had ever worn on camera. Noah noticed this immediately and said nothing about it. They drove for 11 minutes in total silence. Then Blake said, without looking over, "Tell me about the notepad." Noah glanced at him. "What?" "Roy's notepad, the one from the envelope. You told Wade you photographed everything before you shipped it. I want to know what was in the notepad." Noah was quiet for a moment, keeping his eyes on the road. "Names," he said, finally. "Pages and pages of names, with dates next to them, and sometimes a short note after the name like an abbreviation or a phrase. I couldn't read all of them." He paused. "I looked up a few of the dates against some of the names I could find online. They matched up with deaths, funerals, memorial dates." Blake said nothing. "He kept a record," Noah said quietly, "of every brother he'd lost, every funeral he'd ridden to, going back to 1983. The car was very quiet. "How many names?" Blake asked. Noah took a breath. 41. Blake looked out the passenger window. The city was thinning out as they moved toward the industrial edge of Las Vegas, where the garage was the streets going quieter and wider and more honest the further they got from the strip. "I didn't know any of that," Blake said. His voice was strange. Stripped of its usual performance polish, it sounded younger than he looked, uncertain in a way that felt almost painful to hear. "When we bought the bike, I didn't know anything about it." "I know," Noah said. "I tried to stop you," Noah said again, and immediately caught himself. He hadn't meant to bring it back to himself. But Blake looked over at him. "You tried. I didn't let you. That's not on you." He said it simply, without particular emotion, the way someone states a fact they've already worked out and accepted. "That's on me." Noah didn't respond. There wasn't anything to respond to. They pulled up to the garage at 9:22 a.m. From the outside, it looked like any other independent motorcycle shop in outer Las Vegas. Corrugated metal walls, a hand-painted sign, 2 bikes visible through the open bay door. No crowd, no spectacle, no one positioned outside to look intimidating. Just a building, an open door, and the smell of motor oil and old rubber, and decades of work done by hand. Blake sat in the passenger seat for 11 seconds after Noah cut the engine. Noah counted without meaning to. Then Blake opened the door and got out. Wade Mercer was waiting just inside the bay door. Plain flannel, no cut. The same calm blue eyes Noah had met over breakfast on Route 93. He looked at Blake the way an experienced doctor looks at a patient who's come in pretending they're fine with patients and without judgment and with complete clarity about what's actually happening. "Mr. Hunter," Wade said. "Wade." Blake put out his hand. They shook. No performance in it, no posturing, just two hands meeting and releasing. "He's inside," Wade said. "Take all the time you need before you go in. There's no rush." Blake looked at the inner door that led from the bay into the back room. "Is he angry?" Blake asked. Wade considered the question honestly the way he did everything. "No, Walter doesn't do angry the way most people mean it. He does resolved. He's been resolved about this for 2 weeks. He knows what he wants to say, and he's going to say it, and then he's going to let you make of it what you will." He paused. "That's scarier than angry, I know." Blake nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, "it is." He pushed the inner door open and went in. The back room was small. A wooden table, 4 chairs, a single overhead light. On the table, a glass of water, a manila folder, and a small brass key on a worn leather cord. Walter Callahan was sitting on the far side of the table. He was 63 years old and the size of a man who had spent decades doing physical work in all-weather broad across the chest and shoulders, hands on the table that looked like they'd been made from different materials than ordinary hands, worn down and scarred and immensely strong. His hair was mostly silver, kept short. He had Roy's pale blue eyes, though, where Roy's eyes in the photographs looked out at the world with a kind of open, searching quality. Walter's were still, settled, like deep water. He did not stand when Blake came in. He did not offer his hand. He just looked at Blake and said, "Sit down." Blake sat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Blake's entire professional life had been built on filling silence, the ability to talk to a camera for 6 hours without a script, to turn any dead air into content, to never let a moment go unperformed. But sitting across from Walter Callahan, he could not find a single word. Walter looked at him the way the desert looks at everything, without hurry, without need. "My brother rode that motorcycle for the first time in April of 1979, Walter said. His voice was the deep, unhurried voice of someone who has thought about what they want to say for a long time and is now simply saying it. He was 22 years old. He'd just gotten back from 2 years in the Army, and he took every dollar he'd saved, and he bought that Harley from a man in Flagstaff who was selling it because his wife had given him an ultimatum." Walter paused. "Roy said when he first started the engine, it was the first time since coming home that he felt like he was breathing right." Blake's hands were flat on the table. He wasn't moving. "He wasn't a perfect man," Walter continued. "You need to know that. He made mistakes. He had a temper when he was young. There were years when he and his daughter barely talked. He did things in his 30s he spent his 40s making right." His eyes stayed on Blake's face, steady and unblinking. But he was a man who understood what it meant to show up, to be present for the people in his life in ways that cost him something. He reached out and pushed the brass key across the table toward Blake. Blake looked down at it, didn't touch it. "He carried that key every day for 37 years, Walter said. Rain, heat, 2 surgeries, his wife's funeral, his daughter's wedding. Every single day, not out of sentiment, out of intention. He used to say the bike was how he kept his promises. If someone needed him, he got on the bike. If someone died, he got on the bike. If one of his brothers was in a hospital 500 miles away, he got on the bike." Walter's voice was completely even, but there was something behind it, not grief exactly, more like the residue of grief, the permanent stain it leaves that was present in every syllable. The bike was how Roy Callahan kept his word to the world. Blake's jaw was tight. He was staring at the key. "Pick it up," Walter said. A long pause. Then Blake reached out and picked up the key. It was lighter than he expected, and warmer from sitting in the room. The leather cord was smooth and darkened from years of contact with human skin. The brass was worn in the specific way that only comes from being touched thousands of times by the same pair of hands. And something happened to Blake Hunter in that moment that had not happened to him in years, possibly ever, in any moment that was actually being experienced rather than performed. He felt it. Not the idea of it, not the content potential of it, not the narrative arc of it. He felt the actual weight of what he held, which was not a key, but the physical residue of a man's entire life of intention compressed into a small piece of brass on a worn cord. His hand closed around it. "His grandson is 12 years old, Walter said, and his voice was still even, still controlled, but something in it had shifted 1 degree the way a door shifts when the wind outside changes direction. His name is Marcus. He's 12 and he plays baseball, and he's terrible at math, and he loved his grandfather more than anyone in his life. Walter stopped, just for a moment, then he kept going. Roy used to promise him, when you're old enough, I'll teach you to ride. We'll take the Harley out on a Sunday morning and I'll show you everything. How to feel the road, how to trust the machine, how to breathe right when the wind hits you at 70 miles an hour and it feels like the whole world opened up. Walter's voice dropped to something barely above conversational. Marcus is 12 now. Roy's been gone 14 months, and his mother had to tell him last week that the motorcycle doesn't exist anymore. The silence in the room was total. Blake was looking at the key in his hand. His face had changed in a way that had nothing to do with cameras or performance. The manufactured expressiveness he deployed for content, replaced by something rawer and less controlled, the face of a person receiving information that has no comfortable place to go. I didn't know, Blake said. His voice was barely audible. I know you didn't, Walter said. That's the part that kills me more than the anger would. You burned it because you didn't know, because you didn't look, because looking would have slowed down the show. He wasn't raising his voice. He wasn't accusing. He was stating facts the way a coroner states facts, with a clinical precision that is somehow more devastating than any emotion. In your world, things are content until proven otherwise. In Roy's world, things were sacred until proven otherwise. Walter leaned forward slightly. That's the whole story, son. That's every bit of it right there. Blake's throat was working. His eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with ring lights. What do you want from me? He asked. Not defensively, genuinely. Walter sat back. Nothing, he said, and meant it in a way Blake could hear. I don't want your money. I don't want your apology on camera. I don't want a video where you cry and rebuild your brand around what happened out here. He looked at Blake with those still, deep eyes. I want you to carry this, not publicly, not for content, just carry it. The way Roy carried things, quietly, in your own chest, and let it change what you do next. Blake set the key down on the table between them. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said something nobody in his life would have predicted, something his publicist would have told him never to say without legal review, something Tyler Royce would have called completely unhinged, and Savannah would have met with a long, careful silence. He said, I'm sorry, not for a camera, not for my channel, just I'm sorry. Walter looked at him for a long measuring moment. Then he nodded once, the nod of a man who has received something and acknowledged it without requiring it to be anything more or less than what it is. He pushed the manila folder across the table. Open it, he said. Blake opened the folder. Inside were photographs, printed on plain paper, slightly grainy from a home printer. Roy at his daughter's wedding, standing beside the Harley in his cut with gas station flowers in his hand. Roy at a VA hospital Christmas visit, arm around a veteran in a wheelchair. Both of them laughing at something off camera. Roy at a roadside helmet off face turned up to the sky, the kind of photograph taken by someone riding behind him who caught a private moment without meaning to. And at the bottom of the stack, a photograph Blake recognized. The Grand Canyon shot. The one from the text message. Late afternoon light turning everything gold. But this was the full photograph, not cropped the way the anonymous text had sent it. In the full version, there were two people. Roy on the motorcycle. And beside him, one hand on Roy's shoulder, a small boy of maybe 6 or 7 years old, standing on the running board of the bike wearing an oversized helmet that had slipped sideways on his head. Looking at the camera with the enormous, uncomplicated joy of a child who is standing next to his grandfather and feels like the luckiest person alive. Blake stared at the photograph. That's Marcus, Walter said quietly. 6 years old. Roy drove 4 hours to take him to see the canyon for the first time. Said every kid deserved to see it before they decided what kind of person they wanted to be. Blake's hand was pressing flat against the photograph. His shoulders had dropped. Something in his posture, something that had been held rigid and upright through performance and ego, and the constant physical discipline of being watched, had released the way a fist releases when a person finally stops being afraid. Outside in the bay, Noah Mercer was sitting on a workbench with Wade Mercer. Both of them quiet, both of them listening to the muffled sound of voices from behind the inner door. Not the words, just the cadence of them, the rhythm of two people in a room engaged in something real. How long do you think it'll take? Noah asked. Wade picked up his coffee cup, looked at it, set it back down. As long as it takes, he said simply. And then from behind the door, a sound that neither of them had expected. Not shouting, not a raised voice or a slammed table or the sound of a chair scraping back. A silence. A long, deep, absolute silence. The kind that follows something that has landed exactly where it was meant to land. Noah looked at Wade. Wade looked at the door, and the silence held, and held, and held. Blake Hunter came out of that back room 19 minutes after he'd gone in. Noah and Wade both looked up at the same moment. Neither of them spoke. They just watched him walk through the bay door and stop in the open space between the workbenches, and what they saw in his face was something that required no interpretation. He looked like a man who had just put down something extraordinarily heavy. Not relieved relief implies the weight is gone, and this weight wasn't going anywhere. More like reconfigured, like a person who has been carrying a thing in the wrong way for years and has finally been shown how it's actually supposed to be held, and now their whole body is adjusting to the new position. He didn't look at Noah, he looked at Wade. He gave me the key, Blake said. Wade blinked. That was the only reaction, one slow blink. He wasn't supposed to, Wade said quietly. I know. I tried to give it back. Blake's hand went to his jacket pocket, involuntarily pressing against it from the outside. He wouldn't take it. He said Roy would have wanted it to mean something going forward, not just backward. Blake stopped, swallowed. He said he didn't need the key. He had 40 years of memories. He said the key should go to someone who still had time to learn what it meant. Wade was quiet for a long moment. Noah was looking at the floor. What are you going to do? Wade asked. Blake looked at him. And for the first time since any of this had started, since the fire, since the messages, since the burned bolt on Savannah's hood, since the 6 a.m. phone calls and the legal consultations and the publicist's carefully managed silences, Blake Hunter answered a question without first calculating how the answer would play. I don't know yet, he said, but I'm not going to make a video about it. Wade nodded once, the same way Walter had nodded when Blake apologized receiving the statement without requiring it to be more than what it was. Good, Wade said. Blake looked at Noah. Can you drive me back? Yeah, Noah said. He picked up his keys. They drove back to the city in silence for the first 4 minutes. Then Blake said, staring straight ahead at the road, Did you know about the grandson, Marcus? Wade told me, Noah said, the day we had breakfast. Why didn't you tell me? Noah considered the question honestly. Because I didn't think you were ready to hear it then. I thought if I came at you with it before you'd agreed to the meeting, you'd use it as content. He paused. I was wrong to make that call for you. That was my judgment, not yours. I'm sorry. Blake was quiet for a moment. You weren't wrong, he said. A week ago, I probably would have. He pressed his thumb against the outside of his jacket pocket again. What happens to the grandson? What does he get told? What does his mother say to him about all of this? I don't know, Noah said. That's the part I can't figure out how to sit with, Blake said. That kid, he's 12. He's going to grow up knowing his grandfather's motorcycle got burned for 30 seconds of internet content. He stopped, started again. That's going to be a thing he carries for a long time. Noah didn't respond. There was nothing to respond to that would help. Blake looked out the window at Las Vegas, assembling itself around them as they came back into the city, the hotels, the signs, the constant visual noise of a place that runs entirely on the premise that spectacle can substitute for meaning. I've been thinking about quitting, Blake said. Flat, unperformed, like he was thinking out loud rather than making a statement. Noah glanced over. The channel. Everything. The whole thing. Blake's jaw worked. Not as a stunt, not for the redemption arc. I went in that room and sat across from that man, and I kept thinking, what am I building? Like, what is the actual thing I'm building with my life? He laughed short and humorless. And the answer is nothing. I'm building nothing. I'm building a number that goes up and then comes back down. And along the way, I burned a man's motorcycle so strangers could laugh for 30 seconds and never think about it again. Noah said nothing. He kept his eyes on the road. Tyler's still posting, Blake said. I know. He did a video this morning. Did you see it? Yeah. Blake shook his head slowly. He put a Harley helmet on and pretended to cry into it, said he was healing from biker trauma. The disgust in his voice was quiet but total. 4 million views in 3 hours. Yeah, Noah said again. That's who I was, Blake said. 3 weeks ago, that's exactly who I was. They pulled up to this penthouse building. Blake got out, then turned back before closing the door. Noah, the garage, the one in Arizona, the restoration place, the one that's about to close. Noah looked at him carefully. What about it? How much do they need? Noah understood immediately what Blake was asking and what it was not. It was not content, not positioning, not the setup for a video. Wade mentioned it costs about $60,000 to keep the doors open through the year. They do restoration work for veterans, free of charge for anyone who served. Blake nodded, closed the car door, and walked into his building without another word. Noah sat in the rental car for a moment after Blake disappeared through the lobby doors. Then he took out his phone and called Wade. How'd he do? Wade asked. Better than I expected, Noah said. Worse than he'll ever admit to himself. He paused. Wade, he asked about the Arizona garage. A beat of silence. How specific was the question, Wade asked him. Specific enough. Another silence. Okay, Wade said. And Noah could hear something in that single word that was not quite hope. Wade Mercer didn't traffic in hope the way ordinary people did. He dealt in observation and patience, but with something adjacent to it. Something like the first sign of a long-delayed thaw. Okay. The next 72 hours were the most disorienting of Blake Hunter's adult life, and they had nothing to do with anyone else. The first thing he did when he got back to the penthouse was open his laptop and look at the analytics for the Harley video. It was still climbing. 18 million views now. The engagement rate was extraordinary. Comments were still pouring in a roughly 60-40 split between people celebrating the content and people who'd seen Skyline Red's post and arrived with a different kind of energy. His ad revenue from that single video was sitting at a number that would have made him physically euphoric 3 weeks ago. He looked at the number for a long time. Then he opened a new browser tab and searched for the Arizona garage. It came up immediately, a small business listing with a 2-star average review, because the one person who'd left a review had complained about slow turnaround time, clearly not understanding that free restoration work for veterans is not a business that operates on customer service timelines. The garage had a sparse website clearly built by someone who knew nothing about websites, with photographs of completed restorations and a short paragraph about its founding in 1991 by a group of veterans who wanted a place where people who'd served could bring their bikes and have them worked on by people who understood what those machines meant. At the bottom of the page in plain text, due to increasing costs, we may be unable to continue operations past March. It was currently November. Blake closed the laptop. He picked up his phone, put it down, picked it up again. He called his business manager, a careful, methodical man named Greg, who had managed Blake's finances for 3 years and who dealt with Blake's more unconventional financial decisions with the patient resignation of a man who has long since stopped being surprised. I need to transfer $60,000 to an account, Blake said. Personal funds, not the company. Greg was quiet for a moment. Can I ask what for? Charitable donation. Another pause. Do you want to set up a foundation structure for the tax? No structure, no public filing, no press release, just a transfer from my personal account to theirs, and then it's done. Blake paused. And Greg, this doesn't go in the content budget. It doesn't go in marketing. It doesn't go anywhere that could be construed as promotional spend. It's a personal donation. Full stop. Greg was quiet for a long time. Blake, he said finally in a voice that contained 4 years of watching a young man make decisions for reasons that were never entirely human. Are you okay? No, Blake said, but I think I'm getting there. He sent the account details to Greg and hung up. That night, Savannah came over. She arrived at 8 p.m. with a bottle of wine and the kind of careful social energy she deployed when she didn't know what version of Blake she was going to find. She was dressed the way she always dressed, effortlessly, composed every detail, considered the visual product of someone who had spent so many years being looked at that being looked at had become the organizing principle of her existence. She took one look at his face when he opened the door and said, "What happened today?" "I went to the meeting," Blake said. She walked in, set the wine on the counter, and turned to face him. And it was he searched for the right word and discarded every performative option until he found the honest one. It was necessary. Savannah studied him. She was perceptive in ways that didn't always surface publicly because her public self was too carefully managed for genuine perception to show. But privately behind the ring lights, in the sponsorships, in the slow motion aesthetic, she was a sharp, observant person who had been watching Blake Hunter for 3 years and knew the registers of him better than anyone. What she saw right now was something she didn't recognize. "You're different," she said, not accusatory, just factual. "Yeah. Since when?" "Since I sat across from a 63-year-old man and he handed me a key and didn't ask for anything in return." Savannah sat down on the couch, tucked her feet underneath her, looked at him with an expression that was not quite soft and not quite guarded, somewhere in between the unresolved territory of a person who genuinely doesn't know what they feel yet. "I watched the video again last night," she said. "The fire. My slow motion edit." She was quiet for a moment. "It looks beautiful. That's the terrible part. Cinematically, it's stunning. The way the light moves on the chrome before it melts." She paused. "And then I kept thinking someone rode that. Someone put their hands on those handlebars every day for 30 years and felt something real. And I turned it into aesthetic content." Blake sat down across from her. "We both did." "Yeah." She pulled at a thread on the couch cushion. "Tyler called me this morning. He wanted me to do a collab response to the Hells Angels thing. Something about how bikers have been the real bullies in this situation." She stopped pulling at the thread. "I told him no." Blake looked at her. "That's the first time you've ever said no to Tyler," he said. "I know." Something crossed her face, not quite resolved, more like the beginning of it, the moment before a decision becomes solid. He didn't take it well. He never takes anything well that doesn't serve him. They sat with that for a moment. The apartment was quiet in a way it rarely was. Usually there was content running somewhere, a monitor showing analytics, a phone pinging with notifications. Tonight everything was still. "What are you going to do?" Savannah asked. The same question Wade had asked outside the garage. "I already donated to a veterans restoration garage in Arizona," Blake said. "The one that was about to close." Savannah blinked. "How much?" "Enough to keep them open." She was quiet for a long time. "Did you post about it?" she asked. "No," she looked at him steadily. "You're not going to, are you?" "No." Something moved through Savannah Reed's face in that moment. Something that had been trying to surface for a very long time. Some version of herself that existed underneath the sponsorships and the slow-motion beauty content and the carefully curated life. Something that had been watching all of this with growing discomfort and had finally found a way to breathe. "I think I need to take a break," she said, "from all of it. The channel, the brand. I need to just stop performing for a while and figure out what I actually think about things." Blake nodded slowly. "Yeah. That probably means she started. "Yeah," he said again. "I know." She looked at him. He looked at her. And the thing that passed between them was not dramatic. It wasn't a fight or a breakdown or a moment designed for an audience. It was just two people who had built something together that was no longer serving either of them, acknowledging that truth quietly in a kitchen with a bottle of wine neither of them had opened. "I think you're going to be okay," Savannah said, standing up, picking up her bag. "Eventually." "I think you are too," Blake said. She left. He stood at the window for a while after. The city below was doing what it always did, performing endlessly for no particular audience, because that's what it was built for. He watched it for a while, and then he did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He turned off his phone. Completely off. Not silent, not do not disturb, off. He sat in the quiet, and for the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel like dead air that needed to be filled. It just felt like space, real space, the kind of person needs to figure out who they are when nobody is watching. Across the city, Tyler Royce was filming his 14th video of the week. He was wearing a custom jacket that said, "Biker Drama Survivor," on the back, and his live viewer count was 200,000 down from his usual 400,000. And the comments were different now. More hostile, more divided, the specific toxicity of an audience beginning to sense that the thing they're watching has crossed a line they can't quite name but can absolutely feel. Tyler didn't notice. Tyler had never developed the instinct for when an audience was turning because he had never paid attention to anything his audience felt except their numbers. Derek Voss watched Tyler's live stream for 4 minutes that night from his apartment in Henderson. Then he closed his laptop, picked up his phone, and texted a number he'd found after 3 days of quiet research, the contact email for a veterans outreach nonprofit in Reno that ran motorcycle safety education programs. The text said, "I'd like to volunteer. I don't have any relevant skills, but I'm willing to learn. Is that okay?" The response came back 12 minutes later. "That's exactly the right qualification. Come in Saturday." Derek stared at that reply for a long time. Then he typed, "Thank you. I'll be there." He set his phone down, looked around his apartment, the ring light in the corner, the camera on its tripod, the LED panels he'd bought 6 months ago to improve his content quality. He looked at all of it for a long time, the way you look at furniture in a house you were about to move out of. Then he went to bed and slept better than he had in months. Meanwhile, in a small house in Phoenix, a 12-year-old boy named Marcus Callahan was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework badly, the math he was terrible at, the numbers refusing to cooperate, when his mother came in from the other room and sat down across from him. He looked up. She had an expression he recognized, the one she got when she was about to say something important that she had been thinking about for a long time. "I need to tell you something about Grandpa's motorcycle," she said. Marcus put his pencil down. "Is it bad?" he asked. His mother looked at him, this 12-year-old, with Roy's eyes, the pale blue ones that ran in the Callahan line like a genetic signature of something essential, and she said, "Some of it is, but Uncle Walter says something happened this week that Grandpa would have wanted you to know about." Marcus waited. "Someone made a mistake," his mother said carefully. "A bad one, and then someone else tried to make it right. Not perfectly, you can't perfectly fix some things, but they tried. And your great-uncle Walter says sometimes that's all you can ask of people." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Grandpa knows?" he asked. The earnest, non-rhetorical question of a 12-year-old asking about something genuinely enormous. His mother looked at him for a long time. "I think," she said slowly, "that Grandpa would say the motorcycle was just metal and rubber and chrome, and that what he really cared about, the rides, the funerals he showed up for, the people he helped, the promise he made to you, none of that burned." Marcus looked at the table. Then he picked up his pencil and went back to his math. But a minute later, without looking up, he said, "Can Uncle Walter still teach me to ride?" His mother's throat tightened. "Yeah, baby," she said. "He said he'll teach you everything your grandfather taught him." Marcus nodded, kept working. And in that small kitchen in Phoenix, something that had been broken was not repaired. It couldn't be repaired, not entirely, not ever, but it was held, carefully, by people who understood that some things you don't fix. You just carry them forward with as much dignity as you can manage. And sometimes that's enough. The brass key sat in Blake Hunter's jacket pocket through all of it, through the quiet apartment and the turned-off phone and the city performing outside his window. He didn't take it out and look at it. He didn't photograph it. He didn't tell anyone about it. He just knew it was there. And knowing it was there was for now exactly what Walter Callahan had intended it to be. Not a trophy, not a prop, not content, a weight, a real, permanent, meaningful weight. The kind a person carries when they finally decided to be serious about the one life they actually have. 6 weeks after the meeting in the garage, Blake Hunter's channel went dark. No announcement, no farewell video, no carefully produced goodbye that would have generated 30 million views and a wave of parasocial grief from people who'd never once thought about what they were actually watching. One morning, the channel simply stopped uploading, the way a voice stops mid-sentence when a person finally runs out of things they need to say. His management team called. His agent called. 3 different brand partners called within 48 hours, their contracts suddenly fragile without the content pipeline to support them. His publicist sent a 3-paragraph email that was professionally measured in tone and absolutely panicked in substance. Blake responded to none of them. He was in northern Arizona by then. He'd packed 2 bags, the deliberate kind of packing where you make choices about what actually matters, not the frantic kind where you just take everything, and driven himself out of Las Vegas on a Tuesday morning without telling anyone except Noah. He texted Noah one line, "Going north, don't know for how long." Noah texted back, "Okay, call if you need anything." That was the entire conversation. And it was, Blake would think later, the most honest exchange he'd had with another person in 5 years. The town he landed in was small enough that nobody cared who he was. He rented a room above a hardware store from a retired school teacher named Patrice, who charged him $600 a month and told him the Wi-Fi was unreliable and that she expected quiet after 9 p.m. He agreed to all of it. He worked 2 days a week at a local logistics company, actual work, physical work, loading and routing, and spent the rest of his time doing something he hadn't done since he was a teenager. Absolutely nothing productive. He walked. He read books he didn't photograph for social media. He sat in diners and drank coffee and listened to other people's conversations without extracting content from them. He learned that the man who ran the gas station down the road had served in the Marines and had a daughter in medical school and was quietly proud of both facts. He learned these things because he asked and listened, not because he was building a narrative arc. The brass key stayed in his jacket pocket every day. Not as a reminder, not as a prop, just there, the way Roy had carried it, with intention. Tyler Royce's collapse happened fast, the way online things always do, not gradually, but all at once, the moment the audience decides to turn. It started with the veteran in Albuquerque, Cruz, the man who had ridden with Roy for 15 years. His daughter, Skylin, read 11 million subscribers. The one who had posted Roy's photograph without a caption and set the whole second wave of this story in motion, finally spoke. Not with anger, not with a call-out video. She went live on a Thursday evening and spent 45 minutes talking about her father, about Roy Callahan, about what it meant to grow up in a community where a man's word and a man's machine were the same thing. She didn't mention Blake once. She mentioned Tyler Royce exactly once briefly, with the specific precision of a person who has thought carefully about how much energy a thing deserves. There's a young man, she said, who poured motor oil on his head and called grieving veterans internet boomers. And I've thought about responding to that for weeks. And what I keep coming back to is, he's not worth the breath. But the veterans are, so this is for them. Then she talked for another 30 minutes about her father, about the rides, about Roy. 9 million people watched it live. The clip ran to 60 million views in 4 days. Tyler's comment section turned inside out overnight. Not from bots or organized campaigns, from regular people who watched Skyline Red's stream and then went to Tyler's channel and saw suddenly what they were actually looking at. A 27-year-old man who had spent his career performing the absence of conscience and calling it personality. Tyler posted a response video at 2 in the morning. A fatal mistake, the 2 a.m. video. Every publicist in the industry will tell you this, in which he was clearly not sober and said things that his legal team would spend the next month trying to contextualize. His brand partners began dropping within hours. His subscriber count, which had climbed to 4.2 million during the controversy, started bleeding in real time. You could watch the number tick downward in his live analytics like a vital sign dropping. He called Blake at 6 a.m. Blake was awake. He was always awake early, Sal, a habit that had developed organically in Arizona, the way habits do when you're not manufacturing a lifestyle for an audience, because the mornings there were genuinely worth being awake for the air before sunrise, carrying a clarity that no amount of content production had ever given him. He looked at Tyler's name on his screen for a long time, then he answered. "Hey," Tyler said. His voice was rough and stripped of all its usual performance energy. Underneath the persona, Blake realized Tyler sounded like a 27-year-old kid who was genuinely scared. "Did you see?" "Yeah," Blake said. "I saw it." "What do I do?" Tyler's voice cracked on the last word just slightly, the sound of someone who has been holding something together with performance and ego and is now running out of both. Blake took a breath, sat with the question honestly. "The first thing you do," he said slowly, "is you turn off the camera. Today. Not for content. Not as a strategy. You just stop. And then you figure out in the quiet what you actually want to say. Not what performs, what's real." Silence on the other end. "And if nothing real comes," Blake continued, "then you wait until something does. However long that takes." More silence. "Blake," Tyler's voice was very quiet now. "Did you know about Roy, the full story, before the fire?" "No," Blake said, "but Noah tried to." "Yeah, I shut him down." Blake didn't qualify it or contextualize it, just stated it. "I made the decision. The bike burned because I didn't let myself know what I was burning." Tyler was quiet for a long time. "I don't know how to be anything except what I am on camera," he said finally, And the honesty of it was startling because Tyler Royce had never in Blake's memory said anything that wasn't on some level of performance. This was not a performance. This was a 27-year-old man who had just looked in the mirror at 6 a.m. after a catastrophic night and seen someone he didn't entirely recognize. That's the whole problem, Blake said. Not cruelly, just clearly. But it's fixable. It just takes time and it has to happen off camera. He paused. Call your family. Go somewhere quiet. Give it real time, not a week, not a content break. Real time. Tyler didn't respond immediately. Blake could hear him breathing. Okay, Tyler said, finally, small and real and nothing like his public voice. Okay, Blake said back. He hung up and sat with his coffee, and outside the Arizona morning was doing what it did, indifferent and beautiful, and Blake Hunter felt the strange particular sadness of watching someone you have known for years finally arrive at the starting line of something honest, knowing that the road from there is long and you can't walk it for them. The twist that nobody saw coming arrived on a Thursday in late January, 53 days after the meeting in the garage. Noah's phone rang at 7 in the morning. Wade. Something's happened, Wade said. His voice was different, not alarmed, but carrying the specific weight of unexpected news that hasn't finished being processed yet. What? Noah said, sitting up. Marcus, Wade said, Roy's grandson. He came down to the garage in Arizona last weekend with his mother. Walter was going to start teaching him the basics, how to sit on a bike, how to understand the engine, just the fundamentals. Wade paused. And the men at the garage, the veterans, the restoration crew, they'd found out the boy was coming. And they'd been working Noah for 3 weeks, in the evenings after hours on their own time. Noah went still. They found a 1979 Harley Davidson, Wade said, and his voice had something in it now that was unmistakable, even in a man who kept emotion carefully managed. Same model as Roy's, same year. They sourced parts from 4 different states. They restored it from the frame up. They put Roy's wolf insignia on the tank, one of the men who knew Roy painted it by hand. They fitted new leather on the seat. Wade stopped, and they painted it Roy's original color. The dark red he'd always kept it before it faded. Noah couldn't speak. When Walter brought Marcus into the garage, Wade continued, the boy didn't know what he was walking into. He just thought he was going to sit on one of the shop bikes and learn which end was which. Another pause. And there it was, not Roy's bike. They were very clear with him about that. They told him this is not the same bike. That bike is gone, and we can't pretend otherwise. But this is the same year, the same model, the same color. And every man in this garage put his hands on it, and it's yours. Noah pressed his palm against his eyes. How did Marcus react? He whispered. Wade was quiet for a moment. He didn't say anything for a long time, Wade said. He just stood there looking at it. And then he looked at Walter. And Walter said, your grandfather would have wanted you to have something real. This is real. And Marcus walked over to it and put both hands on the handlebars and just held on. Wade's voice was very controlled, but Noah could hear what was underneath it, the bedrock emotion of a man who has ridden beside brothers through decades of funerals and joys and has learned to carry feeling the way Roy carried everything quietly, completely, without performance. He held on for a long time. Noah couldn't find words. The $60,000, Wade said. Blake's donation. It's what paid for the parts. The labor was free, the men did it on their own time. But the parts, the shipping, the paint, that's where the money went. Noah exhaled slowly. Does Blake know? Not yet, Wade said. I'm calling you first. I think you should be the one to tell him. Noah sat with that for a moment. How do I tell him something like that? He said quietly. The same way Walter tells everything, Wade said. Straight, without decoration, just the truth. Noah called Blake 20 minutes later. Blake answered on the second ring. He was walking somewhere. Noah could hear the crunch of ground underfoot, the particular quiet of outdoor Arizona morning air in the background. Hey, Blake said. Hey, are you sitting down? A pause. I can be. What's going on? The restoration garage in Arizona, Noah said. The one you donated to. Yeah, Noah told him. All of it. The 3 weeks of after-hours work. The 1979 Harley sourced from 4 states. The hand-painted wolf insignia. The dark red paint. Marcus walking into the garage not knowing what he was about to find, both hands on the handlebars holding on. Blake didn't speak through any of it. When Noah finished, the line was quiet for a long time. "Noah," Blake said. His voice was very low and very controlled, the voice of someone managing something enormous in their chest. "He knows it's not the same bike." "They were clear with him," Noah said. "Walter was very clear. They told him this is not Roy's bike, but it's real, and it's yours." Another long silence. "Is that—" Blake started, stopped, started again. "Is that enough? For a kid, is that enough to—" "I think," Noah said it carefully, "that Roy's daughter told him something that matters more than the specific bike. She told him that the rides, the funerals Roy showed up for, the promises he made, none of that burned. The fire got the metal, it didn't get any of the rest of it." Blake was completely silent. "Walter taught him to sit on the bike that morning," Noah continued. "Showed him where to put his hands, how to feel the weight of it. And Marcus, he's 12, he's this kid who's bad at math and loves baseball. He sat on that bike, and Walter said he looked like Roy. Just for a second. The way he held his shoulders." The line was so quiet, Noah could hear the Arizona wind through Blake's phone. "Okay," Blake said, very quietly. "Just that." "Okay," Noah said back. They stayed on the line for another moment without speaking, two people on opposite ends of a phone in the American Southwest, sitting with something that was too large and too real and too permanently changed to be resolved into words. Then Blake said, "Thank you for calling me." "Thank you for picking up," Noah said. He hung up. Blake stood wherever he was standing in the Arizona morning, with the wind moving around him and the brass key in his pocket and $60,000 worth of sourced parts rebuilt into a 1979 Harley Davidson in a veteran's garage 200 miles south. And he did not take out his phone to film how he felt. He did not compose a caption. He did not think about engagement rates or narrative arcs or how this moment would play. He just stood there and felt it, all of it, the full, unmediated, unperformed weight of something real. The months that followed settled into their shapes quietly, the way real change always does, not in dramatic reversals, but in the accumulation of small, unremarkable decisions made consistently over time. Noah Mercer left Blake's production company in February. No drama, no public statement, just a professional conversation and a handshake, and two people who had been through something together, acknowledging that the chapter was closed. He took a job with a nonprofit that helped reunite veterans' unclaimed property with their families, an organization he'd found after 3 sleepless nights of searching, the kind of searching that happens when a person has been changed by events and is now trying to figure out what that change obligates them to do. He was good at the work, better than he expected. Derek showed up at the Reno Veterans Outreach on the Saturday he'd promised. He came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. By April, he was running the weekend intake desk. He didn't post about any of it. Evan took a job teaching high school in Flagstaff, English. He told his new colleagues he'd worked in digital media. He didn't elaborate, and nobody pressed him. And he discovered to his genuine surprise that 23 teenagers arguing about the theme of a short story was more alive and real than anything he'd experienced in 5 years of content creation. Savannah took her break. 4 months, no posts, no sponsorships, no content. When she came back differently, quieter, slower, making things for their own sake rather than for the metrics they would generate. She lost 40% of her brand partnerships. She gained something she hadn't had in years that she struggled to name at first until she finally landed on the right word, herself. Tyler took longer. Tyler always would. The road from public collapse to genuine change is longer than social media timelines have patience for, and there were setbacks, a poorly received comeback attempt in March, a period of very public silence that didn't look like the productive kind. But by summer, he was in therapy consistently and without performing it, and his mother told his aunt over the phone that he'd started cooking dinner on Sundays and calling her more, which seemed small and was enormous. Blake stayed in northern Arizona for 7 months. He worked, he walked, he learned the name of every person at the hardware store whose room he rented from Patrice. And he learned that the man at the gas station's daughter graduated from medical school in May, and he drove 4 hours to attend the ceremony, not as content, but as a neighbor showing up because that's what neighbors do. He carried Roy's key every day. And on a Sunday morning in late May, he drove down to the restoration garage in Arizona, not calling ahead, not arranging anything, just showing up the way Roy used to show up, because showing up is the most real thing a person can do. Walter Callahan was there. He usually was on Sunday mornings. He looked up when Blake came through the bay door, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then Walter said, "You want coffee?" "Yeah," Blake said. They drank coffee in the garage, talking about nothing particular. The weather, the restoration project. Walter was working on a carburetor problem that a veteran had brought in 3 weeks ago and was proving stubborn. Real conversation. The kind built out of ordinary details and easy silence, and the specific comfort of two people who have already said the hardest things they'll ever say to each other and can now simply exist in the same space without agenda. After a while, Walter looked over at him and said, "How are you doing, honestly?" Blake thought about it, genuinely thought about it the way the question deserved. "I think I'm starting to understand the difference," he said. Walter looked at him steadily. "Between what? Between things that are content," Blake said, "and things that are sacred." Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a photograph. Handed it across. Marcus, on the 1979 Harley, sitting straight, both hands on the handlebars, wearing a helmet that fit him properly. Looking at the camera with an expression that was not performed, not curated, not produced for any audience. Just a 12-year-old boy on a motorcycle carrying his grandfather forward. Blake held the photograph. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Because some things, the real ones, the ones that matter, the ones that survive, everything the fire can throw at them, don't need words to be true. Roy Callahan had known that. Now finally, so did Blake Hunter. And the key in his pocket, worn smooth from weeks of being carried by the same pair of hands through the desert mornings of northern Arizona, held its warmth quietly the way real things always do, not asking to be seen, not asking to be shared, not asking for anything at all. Just there, real, permanent. The fire had taken the Harley, but it had never touched what the Harley carried. And that every mile, every funeral, every promise kept, every Sunday morning lesson on a stretch of empty highway, every hand that had gripped those handlebars and felt for one clear and uncomplicated moment that the world had opened up, that lived on. In Walter's scarred hands, in Marcus's straight-back posture on a restored bike, in Noah's work returning lost things to the people who needed them, in Derek's Saturday mornings, in Evan's classroom, in Savannah's quieter, more honest life, and in a young man in Arizona who had burned something sacred for 30 seconds of laughter, and who had chosen slowly and perfectly, without an audience, to spend the rest of his life learning what sacred meant. Some lessons cost everything. The ones that do are the only ones worth keeping.